So our first presenter tonight is Stuart Wachowicz. Stuart Wachowicz is an educator with 44 years of experience. He earned his undergraduate degrees at the University of Alberta and his master's degree at the University of Calgary. Stuart taught 25 years in rural Alberta, where he was a math teacher and a school administrator. In 1975, he became Director of Curriculum for Edmonton Public Schools. It was during his tenure in this role that Edmonton Public Schools served as one of the largest curriculum contractors in Western Canada. I remember Mr. Wachowicz well. This was during my own time as a high school teacher, and he had a formidable reputation as a leader in curriculum development. Mr. Wachowicz has been the director and is now chairman of the board of the Confucius Institute in Edmonton, a non-profit organization dedicated to strengthening the educational, cultural, and economic ties between Canada and China. Stuart is invited all over the world to present on second language education. Among his many national and international awards and recognitions, Mr. Wachowicz makes special mention of the Qilu Friendship Award from Governor Shandong Province in China, and an honorary lifetime membership in the Canadian Association of Second Language Teachers. Mr. Wachowicz is a true teacher with a deep understanding of the importance of starting with the right curriculum and the best teaching methods to grow and develop truly strong and inquiring minds. With his presentation and uninspiring education disadvantaging Alberta's youth, please welcome with me Mr. Stuart Wachowicz.
Change of the height. Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank you all for coming, and certainly a thank you to Dr. Tran Davis and all the volunteers who organized this meeting tonight, and thank you for all the energy you put into this. My own involvement is out of a deep concern for the future of the potential of Alberta's youth. And one of the benefits in democracies is that we have the right to articulate a polite but dissenting opinion. And tonight, we shall utter a dissenting opinion, hopefully for the better, and hopefully for change. Educational systems over the past couple of decades have been under a growing pressure to depart from a model oriented toward a provision of knowledge and skills through direct teaching, and move toward a model promoted in the very early 20th century by John Dewey, the founder of the progressive movement. Dewey's influence had resulted in several waves of progressive innovations being imposed on school systems. Those include, and some of you would know well of them, whether it's whole language or child-centered education or inquiry or discovery learning or constructivism, just to name a few. It is interesting that not a single one of those initiatives have been positively correlated to improve student learning using reproducible and quantified measures. In fact, virtually all of the manifestations of progressive education have shown negative impacts when measured on standardized assessments against traditional models of teaching. And perhaps this is one of the main reasons why the proponents of such philosophies that are progressivist in nature are nearly universally opposed to the application of large-scale standardized assessments and highly prescriptive knowledge-based curriculum. It has long been observed that progressive approaches, when used in the classroom, require significantly more time to cover a single outcome. And consequently, there has been a gradual and steady decline in the number of knowledge outcomes in curriculum. And so serious has this trend been viewed that in a study by the Toronto Dominion Financial Group, Literacy Matters: A Call to Action in September 2007, author Alexander Craig decried the serious decline in literacy rates and the overall levels of reduced knowledge in graduates. And he concluded that that presents a serious threat to Canada's future economy. Now this brings us to the newest manifestation of progressivist thought, and that's one, perhaps it's one of the most far-reaching experiments in Canadian history, and that's called inspiring education. Inspiring education, as you've heard from Dr. Tran Davis, is an initiative of Alberta Education to implement and enforce a radical change, by their own admission, and it will be implemented in all schools that receive government funding, whether private or public, Catholic, charter, online, homeschooling, whatever. And it will have a direct impact on programs of study because it will include, by necessity, a revision of curriculum, the teaching resources, and the means of assessing learning. Now, one of the key features in this new construct is that the curricula will be predicated on a teaching methodology. To date in Alberta, curriculum, theoretically anyway, has been defined by, or as the what that students need to learn, and the how of learning was left to the professional judgment of teachers. And teachers have made those judgments as to when to use direct instruction or project learning or a host of other strategies. But now we have a system based upon a radical interpretation of progressivist theory called constructivism, which to a great extent directs the learning process. Constructivism itself means taking, the learning takes place in situations where a student may be presented with a problem and then they have to draw on his or her own experience to devise a solution or discover a truth or relationship that will help the student understand a situation or a fact. And that method can work very well with advanced students who have already acquired a very firm foundation. But many well-known researchers have expressed grave concerns about that the approach disregards what's been understood by cognitive scientists regarding how the human brain learns and how these things relate to both long-term and working memory. There are a number of research papers, and I have a document here that I can share with you, and you can just email me and I can send it to you, with many, many research projects. The Meyer report, should there be 3 strikes against pure discovery learning by American psychologists. The Sweller report, one of the most comprehensive comparison of cognitive load associated with discovery learning. That's a critical piece of research in the Journal of Educational Psychology, and also does discovery learning based on instruction, enhanced learning. These are written by knowledgeable people on these methods, and yet they are disregarded. Alberta Education states on its own website that the curriculum must become less prescriptive. And Alberta Education has also stated that learner outcomes will be reduced to 10 per grade per year, and you can find that in the reference on the Alberta government documents that are there, Curriculum Developing Prototyping Guide, August 2013, page 1. Earlier initiatives have seen educational planners already at work. Virtually the elimination of the teaching of handwriting in Alberta has already been accomplished. Despite the fact that research shows that is compromising the communication between the 2 hemispheres of the brain. In fact, I was in China, and a leading Chinese scholar said, well, you're deliberately disadvantaging yourself and giving us the advantage because we use both sides of our brain when we read and write because of the character system. And he's got a very good point. But earlier initiatives have wiped out handwriting. Most of the aspects of English grammar are no longer explicitly taught, which was used to help us avoid being ambiguous. Formal geometry, the most powerful problem-solving tool in mathematics, is virtually gone from the curriculum. Comprehensive geography, not there. Fundamental concepts of math and science are gone. At the same time, basically all expectations of student memorization are absent in curriculum, and this we know is the greatest tool of increasing attention span. But now we have an attention span, as you heard recently, less than a goldfish. So none of this was done in consultation with parents, as was mentioned, and this is all to provide time for the constructivist approach. In the end, the student will logically have less knowledge and skill and will be less prepared for post-secondary education and their careers. And despite the overwhelming evidence and empirical research, Alberta Education seems determined to be full speed ahead with this model with implementation beginning in September 2016. It is well documented that each progressivist fad has resulted in a decline in student achievement measured empirically. And the world's leading experts in cognitive science, whether it's Steven Pinker or others, have decried that development. But whether we call it inspiring education, whether we call it 21st century learning model, 21st century skills, it ignores neuroscience. That's just a fact. And the general public is unaware of how radical this change will be and the potential disadvantage for Albertan youth. Already Albertan students are experiencing difficulty competing with foreign trained students in our university. Professors will quickly admit it's a function of background training, which is being gutted and replaced with inquiry-based or problem-solving exploration against well-documented studies. And there's an additional dimension that we may not think about very often, but in 1948, Canada signed the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which recognized that parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that should be given to their children. That is a consequence of World War II. We didn't want authoritarian governments controlling everything that happened to our children. Now, we've forgotten World War II largely and its causes, but that's why that was there. And now, in Alberta, up to now, Alberta parents could choose to send their children to a diverse range of schools. Public, Catholic, private, alternative, charter, whatever, homeschooling, selecting from a wide variety of approaches. Curriculum could be taught through a broad range of pedagogical practice, according to the philosophy of the school or the judgment of the teacher that was needed in specific cases. But now, predicated on one philosophy, teachers must comply. And they're not speaking out because they are afraid to speak up. Predicated on one philosophy, and it is compromising the autonomy of schools, educators, trustees, and parents. And it renders meaningful choice to meet student needs impossible. The ministerial order of May 2013 was mentioned already. But it does say the focus should be on competency rather than content, on inquiry, discovery, and application of knowledge rather than dissemination of information. Well, that statement is contradictory at the outset, because competency depends on content as a foundation. And in the same way, inquiry and discovery are fruitless without a baseline of knowledge upon which to argue a thesis or build a new idea. The ministerial order is also in total contradiction of Section 19 of the School Act, which permits instruction in alternative programs or charter schools to be made on a pedagogical choice. So how is that going to play out in inspiring education? It also contradicts cognitive research. And I've listed a few other of those. I don't want to go through each of those research papers. I can give you the whole research paper summary of it at a later time. But let me I'll just comment on Dr. Steven Pinker. He happens to be a professor of psychology at Harvard Johnson Chair. He was formerly the director of cognitive neuroscience at MIT, but I guess his opinion doesn't count. He doesn't understand what children in the 21st century really need, because the brains are different now. There must have been a devolution in progress. Inspiring education is full of empty promises. It talks about producing engaged thinkers and entrepreneurial spirits. And the chambers of commerce have been hoodwinked by this. I've talked to several of them. They said, well, it's a great idea because they're going to be entrepreneurial now. Well, how do you become entrepreneurial when you are knowledgeless? In conclusion, inspiring education comes at a price. And we have to ask ourselves if we're willing to pay that price. First of all, it is the end of meaningful choice. Inspiring education redefines the very meaning of curriculum and forces all Alberta teachers to practice a singular pedagogical model. Removing choice, ignoring students who benefit from a variety of teaching methods, And with no choice, of course, there's no competition and no comparison. And that's why you don't have assessment. Secondly, we will see from a mathematical certainty a further decline in student achievement. Aspiring education mandates this approach that has a poor track record of student achievement when looked at in any quantified studies. And international research, and again, as I've said, the experts in cognitive science, while in agreement, are being ignored. So poor student achievement is predicted. Along with that is increased student frustration. Due to reduction of outcomes, fewer knowledge objectives, and the minimal guided approach offered through constructivism by the teachers, students will be faced with a curriculum requiring much less knowledge acquisition. And the predictable result of what the cognitive scientists call cognitive overload will occur. Because as students without a base try to find out stuff, they get overloaded with things they don't understand, and they get discouraged. And there will be a diminished capacity for thinking, problem solving, creativity, all the things that it's supposed to produce. They will lack ability to analyze and argue a logical argument. There will be also a loss of standards, a loss of educational equity across the province. And this is due to the elimination of large-scale summative assessments. There will be a weakening of standards, a loss of consistency, and a loss of real accountability. And the abolition of provincial achievement tests, for example, removes the only comprehensive tool for measuring student achievement in empirical terms across the province. The replacement student learning assessments, due to their nature and their timing, cannot be used to monitor school performance or meaningfully measure student achievement at the close of the school year. So divergence of quality will be an inevitable result. That is not fair. There will be automatically a loss of academic and economic competitiveness. A weaker scaled-back curriculum will reduce the ability of Alberta school graduates to compete in the global economy against better trained foreign students who've had the benefit of a content-rich education. That is a fact as well. It's already playing out in many of our professional faculties. There is an erosion of professionalism of teachers, a decline in the range of professional judgments exercised by teachers, as their instructional methods will be restricted to those defined and mandated, and this is imposed reduction in professionalism. That is demeaning of teachers. And finally, there's the detrimental results of technology. Inspiring education will see increased funding and increased emphasis placed on technology as a learning tool in the classroom, largely to the detriment of student learning and student health. There is currently billions being spent on technology, but not one empirical study that links the use of technology to improved student results. Now, yet, there is a growing body of medical evidence that excessive screen time can have decidedly negative impacts on student health. The Mayo Clinic, the American Academy of Pediatricians, etc., have all reported on that. So, the conclusion here is that inspiring education is predicated on misguided educational theory, implemented without quantified studies, and built upon a series of false assumptions of what should be learned and how it should be learned. These are fantasies at work in the design. And building a curricular design on unproven theories is unsound at best and irresponsible at worst. And forcing such pedagogy on school settings that align with Alberta education is to counter educational laws. I work with a group called Parents for Choice in Education, and we make 5 demands. I just read them very quickly. First of all, we're saying that if you're going to implement anything, number one, that the minister needs to put in writing that the curriculum does not dictate a method of instruction and that direct instruction may be a strategy a teacher can use. Secondly, all curriculum can be enriched and expanded as required for a student, class, or alternative program, or by the choice of the school. What's wrong with that? 3, alternative programs predicated on pedagogical definition may use whatever pedagogical approach is commensurate with their philosophy. 4, and there's just 5 of them. Curriculum should be carefully sequenced with learning outcomes defined so they can be directly taught prior to having students involved in project-based learning. And I'll add one more, that they should be designed by a backward design starting at grade 12 and then backward design to kindergarten. And that not the front office of the universities, but the department heads of subject areas need to be involved in setting those endpoints to make a smooth articulation. And finally, there needs to be a return to province-wide assessment based on skill outcomes and the core knowledge. At least at grade 6 and 9, and 12, of course. So in conclusion, in its present concept, inspiring education will reduce mathematically the student potential and the negative impact on the child's future and our province's future. And it needs to be changed. We do not need institutionalized child abuse.